When people think of WWE, names like John Cena, The Undertaker, or Randy Orton usually come to mind, icons who've been around for the long haul. But did you know that many legendary figures actually passed through WWE in the blink of an eye, only to vanish as if they were never there? From ECW and WCW icons to indie darlings and even Japanese legends, these stars once stepped foot in a WWE ring, however briefly. And today, Wrestling Sphere is taking you through 10 famous wrestlers you had no idea ever competed in WWE. Brace yourself, this list just might surprise you. Number 10. Mr. Wrestling 2. A choice with presidential flair. During the territorial days of professional wrestling, John Walker, better known as Mr. Wrestling 2, was one of the biggest names in the southeastern United States. With his signature black and white mask and a classic but effective wrestling style, he quickly became a fan favorite in Georgia and Florida. His popularity even broke past the squared circle and reached all the way to the White House. Mr. Wrestling 2 was so beloved that he became President Jimmy Carter's favorite wrestler. But their bond wasn't just a fan-celebrity relationship. It was strong enough that Mr. Wrestling 2 was invited to attend Carter's presidential inauguration in 1977. However, things didn't go as planned. When the Secret Service asked him to remove his mask for security reasons, he refused. To him, the mask wasn't just a gimmick, it was part of his identity. It was the line between his public persona and private life. And he was willing to miss the chance to meet the president just to protect that line. Still, he shared a warm moment with President Carter's mother, who was also a huge fan. It was a heartfelt and respectful meeting, not the kind of backstage encounter you might be imagining. As a territory icon, it's hard to believe Mr. Wrestling 2 once stepped into a WWE ring, specifically the WWF, toward the end of his career. When Vince McMahon bought out Georgia Championship Wrestling in 1984, Mr. Wrestling 2 came along as part of the deal. But by then, his prime had passed. His movements were slower, his strikes less sharp. Within just a year, he quietly left WWE, ending a brief stint in a company he never truly fit into. A local legend. A name that once reached the political stage. Yet in the grand history of WWE, he remains a small, often forgotten chapter. Number 9. Samoa Joe. When fans hear the name Samoa Joe, they immediately picture a cold-blooded warrior with a ruthless fighting style, famous for his brutal battles in TNA and Ring of Honor. Nicknamed the Samoan Submission Machine, Joe became a symbol of wrestlers who reached the top outside of WWE. For years, he was arguably the biggest name WWE had never signed, until 2015, when he finally joined the company and shook the pro wrestling world. What most people don't realize, though, is that Samoa Joe had already stepped into a WWE ring once before, all the way back in the early 2000s. It was a little-known, almost forgotten moment in his career. In March 2001, back when Joe was still a young man with a much smaller frame than the powerhouse we know today, he appeared on a WWE secondary show called WWF Jacked. That night, his opponent was S.A. Rios, a wrestler who, by then, had already faded from the spotlight. The match was short and left no lasting impression. Samoa Joe, in his WWE debut, had no chance to showcase the signature traits that would later define him. The vicious chokeholds, the MMA-style offense, or the cold, calculated mind games. He was simply a name that flashed briefly on the screen. No one knowing that a few years later, that same name would become a legend in WWE's rival promotions. Looking back, it's fascinating to compare that forgettable moment to the incredible journey that followed. Before Samoa Joe broke the game by storming into WWE and dominating NXT and Raw, he was just a blip in the system, a reminder that even legends can start in the most humble, unlikely ways. Number 8. Bruiser Brody. When talking about the most feared legends in pro wrestling history, you have to mention Bruiser Brody, a nightmare for opponents and the very embodiment of wild, violent brawling. With his tangled hair, crazed eyes, and relentless style, Brody was a force of nature in the 1970s and 80s, especially in Japan, where he was worshipped as an indomitable warrior. Throughout his career, Brody conquered nearly every territory except WWE. He was a staple everywhere, from NWA and AWA to WCCW and both New Japan and All Japan Pro Wrestling. His resume was stacked to the point that WWE seemed to be the only place missing, though that's not entirely true. Few people know that Bruiser Brody did step into the WWE ring, Back when it was still known as the WWF, under the leadership of Vince McMahon Sr., his most notable match during that time was a showdown with company icon Bruno Sammartino, a rare clash between two larger-than-life figures, and potentially the beginning of something bigger. But, as was often the case in Brody's unpredictable career, he refused to play by the rules. After a backstage altercation with Gorilla Monsoon, a respected figure in the company, Vince Sr. immediately fired him. And just like that, any chance of a future with the WWF vanished. Bruiser Brody never returned to WWE. But he didn't need to. His legacy lives on through the many brawlers who followed in his footsteps, wrestlers who see him as their greatest inspiration. And while his time in WWE was only a fleeting moment, his presence still adds a fascinating layer to the golden era of wrestling history. Number 7. The Fabulous Freebirds. If you're a hardcore WWE fan, the name Michael P.S. Hayes is probably very familiar. He's been a key figure behind the scenes in WWE for over 2 decades, known for his flashy mic work and signature long hair. But what may surprise many is that Hayes was once the leader of one of the most iconic tag teams in American wrestling history, the Fabulous Freebirds. And even more shocking, this legendary group did once wrestle in WWE, if only for a moment. Formed in the late 1970s, the trio of Michael Hayes, Terry Gordy, and Buddy Roberts brought a rebellious, rock-infused energy to wrestling. They were the first tag team to use entrance music, something now considered a staple of the industry. In world-class championship wrestling in Dallas, their legendary feud with the Von Erich family turned every match into a must-see event. By 1984, WWE, then the WWF, was entering its rock and wrestling connection era, blending pro wrestling with pop culture. Vince McMahon wanted to bring in more music-driven personalities, and the Freebirds seemed like a perfect fit. However, the partnership was short-lived. Although they were signed and appeared on a few shows, the Freebirds quickly vanished from the scene.
Why?
According to backstage rumors, they showed up late to an event and unintentionally angered Andre the Giant. And with someone like Andre, all it took was a cold glare to send the message loud and clear. The Freebirds didn't feel welcome after that. The Fabulous Freebirds left WWF quietly, without fanfare. But their legacy lived on. Even with just a fleeting presence in WWE, they were eventually inducted into the Hall of Fame, a rightful place for a group that changed the game. Number 6. Christopher Daniels. Christopher Daniels, affectionately known by fans as the Fallen Angel, has been one of the most defining figures in the American independent wrestling scene for over 2 decades. With his smooth in-ring style, technical precision, and unmatched storytelling ability, Daniels became more than just a great wrestler. He was a driving force behind the rise of promotions outside WWE. Before becoming a cornerstone of Ring of Honor and TNA, where he delivered legendary matches and collected numerous titles, Daniels had brief stints in WCW and wrestled across countless promotions throughout the U.S. In 2000, he won the inaugural King of the Indies tournament held by APW, a title that helped solidify his reputation as the true king of independent wrestling. What many don't know is that Christopher Daniels also appeared on WWE programming in the late 1990s. At the time, WWE had multiple secondary shows and needed solid opponents to elevate their talent. Still an unknown name, Daniels had 2 noteworthy matches against Taka Michinoku on Shotgun Saturday Night. Though these were enhancement matches, Daniels stood out with his speed, precision, and command of the ring, far beyond the role of a typical background opponent. Though he never signed a long-term contract with WWE, those early appearances served as a launching pad for Daniels' future. It gave him exposure, experience, and the chance to shine elsewhere, places where he could fully showcase his personality and limitless skill. And clearly, that choice paid off. Christopher Daniels never needed a long WWE run to become a legend. He carved his own path, bold, independent, and deeply influential. But it's fascinating to realize that this trailblazing journey once briefly passed through a WWE ring, a little-known chapter in the story of a true original. Number 5. Tiger Mask. In the world of Japanese wrestling, few characters are as iconic or culturally influential as Tiger Mask. The character originally came from a manga series in the late 1960s, telling the story of a masked wrestler who fought for justice. That story was later adapted into an anime series spanning over 100 episodes, becoming a nationwide phenomenon in Japan. Recognizing the character's massive potential, New Japan Pro Wrestling brought Tiger Mask to life in the ring. The first person to wear the legendary mask was Satoru Sayama, a rising star at the time known for blending crisp technical wrestling with daring high-flying maneuvers. Sayama not only turned Tiger Mask into a sports icon, but also revolutionized the cruiserweight style that would influence generations to come. What makes this story even more interesting is that Sayama, the original Tiger Mask, once competed in the WWF. In the early 1980s, WWE, then still the WWF, had a working relationship with New Japan Pro Wrestling, allowing Japanese stars to appear in the US and vice versa. And Tiger Mask, who was rapidly rising in popularity, was one of those stars. He performed multiple times at Madison Square Garden, widely regarded as WWE's sacred ground. With a wrestling style that combined grace, speed, and technique, Sayama instantly caught the attention of American audiences who were not yet used to such a fast-paced, fluid approach. Though his run in WWE was brief, his presence left a lasting impression. Today, the name Tiger Mask has been passed down through multiple generations of wrestlers, but Satoru Sayama, the original, remains the one true icon. And few realize that a part of his legendary journey once passed through the grand stage of WWE. Number 4. Kevin Von Erich. When it comes to wrestling legacy in Texas, few names carry more weight than the Von Erich family, a dynasty marked by both greatness and heartbreak. Among them, Kevin Von Erich stands out as the last surviving member and arguably the most iconic. With his flowing blonde hair, chiseled physique, and fiery fighting style, Kevin was a fan favorite in world-class championship wrestling, where he ignited the crowd every time he entered the ring. Unlike many of his peers who traveled across territories to grow their fame, Kevin remained loyal to his Texas roots. Nearly his entire career was spent in World Class, the promotion founded and run by his father. It was there that he and his brothers engaged in a legendary feud with the Fabulous Freeirds, one of the most intense rivalries in Southern wrestling history. Their brutal, emotional clashes helped define the Southern wrestling style for years to come. What truly set Kevin apart, however, was his choice to wrestle completely barefoot. No boots, no ankle wraps, just his bare feet, leaping fearlessly from the ropes and delivering punishing offense. That barefoot image became his signature and remains one of the most unique visuals in wrestling history. But what many don't know is that, during those Texas-centered years, Kevin Von Erich actually made one single appearance in the WWF. In 1980, on a short trip to New York, he wrestled at Madison Square Garden, WWE's most hallowed venue, and defeated Johnny Rodz in what would be his only WWE match. He soon returned to Texas, continuing to build his legacy on home soil. It was a fleeting moment on WWE's grand stage, but it proved that even someone as rooted in independence as Kevin Von Erich once stood under the bright lights of wrestling's biggest platform. Number 3. Kevin Sullivan. When it comes to longtime WCW staples, Kevin Sullivan easily ranks near the top. For over a decade, he wasn't just an in-ring performer. He was also one of the key creative minds behind many of WCW's most pivotal storylines and twists. Despite all the controversy that eventually surrounded WCW, Sullivan remains one of its most loyal and influential figures. Veteran fans will likely remember his eerie Taskmaster persona, the mysterious leader of the Dungeon of Doom, a faction filled with bizarre, over-the-top characters whose sole mission was to destroy Hulk Hogan. The group was often criticized for being too cartoonish, more like something out of a Saturday morning kids show than professional wrestling. Still, it left a lasting impression, thanks in large part to Sullivan's weirdly compelling and imaginative leadership. But what many fans don't know is that before becoming a core figure in WCW, Kevin Sullivan had already made his way to WWE, or more accurately, the WWF under Vince McMahon Sr. back in the 1970s. Sullivan wrestled as a babyface, a crowd-favorite good guy, in mid-card matches. He had a solid technical foundation, a well-built physique, and a fiery attitude in the ring, but he was never pushed to the main event scene. Why? Simply put, he was considered too short. In an era where size and towering presence were everything, Sullivan's talent wasn't enough to overcome the lack of height. Eventually, he left the WWF to seek better opportunities elsewhere, and ultimately found his place in WCW. Kevin Sullivan is proof that you don't need WWE to build a legendary career. But even so, it's fascinating to know that he once had a brief, mostly forgotten stint in WWE's early history. Number 2. Public Enemy. When you talk about tag teams that defined the chaotic early days of ECW, you can't leave out Public Enemy. The duo of Rocco Rock and Johnny Grunge embodied everything ECW stood for: rebellion, recklessness, and sheer mayhem in the ring. In a world where rules were practically non-existent, every match they had felt like an all-out riot. Public Enemy were known not just for their wild brawling style, but for their creativity in using anything and everything as a weapon, from tables and chairs to whatever objects fans threw their way. They were central figures in one of ECW's most iconic moments, the legendary Throw Me a Chair incident, where the ring was buried under a storm of steel chairs hurled by an out-of-control crowd. It was chaotic, dangerous, and perfectly summed up ECW's brand of hardcore. After making a name for themselves in ECW, both WWF and WCW tried to recruit the duo. Initially, Public Enemy signed with WCW, where they had a few memorable moments and even captured the tag team titles. But their extreme style didn't quite mesh with WCW's more traditional format, and their run there was relatively unremarkable. In 1999, Public Enemy decided to give WWE a shot, during a time when the tag team division was ultra-competitive. However, their time in WWE was short-lived. From the very start, they weren't welcomed in the locker room, largely because they had once turned down WWF in favor of WCW. That decision came back to haunt them. The message was loud and clear. In a televised match against the Acolytes, Bradshaw and Farouk, Public Enemy were utterly destroyed. No comebacks, no glory, just a one-sided beatdown meant to send a message. Within just a few months, Public Enemy left WWE, closing the book on a short and bitter chapter. Still, their ECW legacy remains untouchable. In that lawless arena, they were kings of chaos. Number 1. Taz. With his short, stocky frame, cold demeanor, and intense fighting style, Taz was an irreplaceable icon of ECW. He didn't need towering height or a massive physique to strike fear into his opponents. His vicious suplexes, expert grappling, and near-flawless control in the ring turned him into a true submission machine. Fans of 1990s ECW will never forget the image of Taz storming out with a towel draped over his head, eyes sharp like blades, radiating a fury that made it feel like he was about to devour anyone in his path. Taz wasn't just a wrestler, he was a force. A warrior unafraid of conflict, always pushing every match to its absolute limit. What many may not realize, though, is that Taz also had a run in WWE, and not just a blink-and-you'll-miss-it appearance. In fact, he made one of the most memorable debuts of the time. At the 2000 Royal Rumble, Taz shocked the world by appearing as Kurt Angle's surprise opponent. Angle, who was undefeated at the time, was forced to tap out in under 5 minutes inside Madison Square Garden. It was a stunning upset and a dream debut for Taz. Unfortunately, his WWE career didn't unfold as many had hoped. Persistent injuries, especially to his neck and back, a result of his brutal in-ring style, made it difficult for him to keep up physically. Rather than risk further damage, Taz stepped away from active competition and transitioned to commentary, a role he excelled in, thanks to his distinctive voice and sharp, often humorous insights. While his time in WWE was brief, Taz still made a lasting impression. He proved that you don't need a long tenure to be remembered. Just the right moment, delivered perfectly, can cement your place in wrestling history. Which name on the list surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Wrestling Sphere so you never miss out on the most unique and exciting wrestling stories every day.